going from zero to a large budget is extraordinarily difficult, and it takes a lot of time. And so people are always frustrated on the outside, and they say, well, you have money, why didn't you do anything? Well, getting ready to spend money is difficult, and I'd appreciate Kevin's thoughts on that. But I know this administration is also working on that issue now and trying to look for accelerated ways to try to do that.
Yeah, I think when you have a huge budget swing, you're right. One of the things we knew would be an issue in moving the office from NOAA back to the Office of the Secretary is you needed the right infrastructure around you to do the things that an office of that type would have to do.
Hello, welcome to the Space Policy Show. I'm Colleen Stover with the Center for Space Policy and Strategy, part of the Aerospace Corporation. This is the last episode in our 6-part Going Faster series. It's been all about accelerating business, national security and intelligence and launch, and accelerating technology and even exploration for the future of the Moon and Mars. We're doing all of this by building capacity between government and industry. So be sure to check out the other shows. Today, we start with a bit of history, though, and reflection from 2 remarkable former directors of the Office of Space Commerce, Richard DalBello and Kevin O'Connell. They represent collected knowledge and experience and insight over multiple White House administrations, and both of them continue to consult and advise today. So look forward to some of that in the conversation. How can government balance space safety needs and support industry at the same time? What is the role of government there? What are the enablers and the challenges to building so-called regulatory capacity and ensuring our global partners and competitors match? So let's go to Christine Joseph. She's starting with a great overview of the Office of Space Commerce, and she's leading the conversation today. We're lucky to have her here at Aerospace. She's an MIT grad. She's a former Hill staffer on the House Committee for Science, Space, and Technology, and she's former advisor at OSC herself. So over to Christine.
Thank you, Colleen, for that wonderful introduction. We're so happy and excited to have both Richard and Kevin, former Office of Space Commerce directors, here with us today. Now, a lot of folks may not realize, but the Office of Space Commerce was actually founded way back in 1988 and was formerly known as the Office of Space Commercialization within the Department of Commerce. Its mandate from Congress is to act as the principal unit, helping coordinate space policy issues and representing commercial space interests within the Department of Commerce, and helping advocate for those issues and fostering the conditions for the growth of the U.S. commercial space industry. Now, in recent years, the Office of Space Commerce, or OSC, has undergone numerous changes, from a name change, moving into and within the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, to being charged with standing up a civil space situational awareness system, now currently known as the Traffic Coordination System for Space, or TRAX, which has had its beta released to a number of beta users across the commercial satellite industry, to advocating and bringing the U.S. commercial industry to international dialogues to advocate and bring their perspectives to the table, to, as many of you may have seen from their public outreach channels, lots of outreach and advocacy to raise issues to the public and U.S. industry and getting their feedback so that the OSC can better represent their interests. Now, bringing it to our guests, a lot of people may not also realize that, Richard, you were with the Office of Space Commerce well before you became its director. Can you talk a little bit about your experiences, your prior experiences at OSC, and what the mission was like back then?
Christine, first of all, it's great to be here. Thanks for allowing me to participate on the show. It's hard to imagine how dramatically our industry and our attitudes towards commercial have changed over the last 40 years, or at least since the office was developed. Looking back in time, in the 1980s, people had ideas like they thought telephone companies were natural monopolies, and they wanted to act. The government actively discouraged competition. The idea was that space was a province of the government only, and people looked to defense and national security space and to NASA, but when they thought about the commercial sector, they didn't think that the commercial sector would have the resources or the capability to be able to address the daunting challenges of space activities. And what we've seen now is a dramatic reversal of those attitudes. Of course, I think, we have markets that are now very competitive. We have the private sector playing a major role, not only in launch, but in data acquisition and satellite communications. And these are robust industries where we have great international competition. And if we look again back in time, none of that was the case in the 80s. So really the creation of the office was a really innovative idea by the Reagan administration in order to start infusing commercial concepts into what was a rather traditional and government-focused space sector. And very shortly after the creation of the office, we started to see dramatic changes in the marketplace, commercial launch companies, commercial remote sensing companies, ideas like radio from space, competition in the satellite communications fields. So the initiative was an important one, and it had tangible and immediate effects.
Thank you very much, Richard. And switching a little bit over to Kevin. Kevin, you came on as the Director of Office Space Commerce several years after the position had been vacant. How did you start off, and what types of goals were you coming into when you came into that position, considering the vacancies had been going on for a bit?
Thanks, Christine, and thanks to you and Colleen for the invite to be here today, and always great to be back with Rich. When I got to the office in middle 2018, I actually had 4 initiatives that I wanted to put in place. You were right, the office had been vacant for a director for about a decade, as I recall. And when I arrived, I had the remnants of the 2018 budget. I remember it being $400,000 and 3 people, two permanent staff and an administrator. I had 4 initiatives I wanted to put in place when I got there. They were very common to the organization already. Engage industry, regulatory reform, and work on space data statistics. I knew the space data statistics were weak. We ultimately turned to the Bureau of Economic Analysis to work on those. And then obviously we had been given, literally the day I was appointed at the White House, SPD3 to implement as well. So that was a big task we knew we were going to undertake at the time, regardless of the resources involved.
Can you talk a little bit more about SPD3? Or for those in our audience that aren't familiar, Space Policy Directive 3?
Yeah, Space Policy Directive 3 was, of course, an early Trump 1 administration initiative. I think we didn't realize how important it was going to be until we got into office. And obviously, I think SPD3, again, the policy directive, was one of the earlier ones envisioned. I think we knew we were going to have to deal with that topic at some point, but it came up so quickly, and a lot of the space community said, this has grown very, very urgent. There are many different mandates of SPD3 to deal with the issue of space safety and space debris as an integrated whole of government effort, whole of US government effort. Secondly, to leverage our international and commercial partners to extend research and development activities in this area. But mostly to deal with the opportunity created by the innovation in the private sector. Rich has already spoken about this, and really harness that to try to move quickly against this pretty fast-moving problem.
So, and Christine, if I can jump in.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think at the time, there was the commercial sector itself recognized that there was a need of some better ordering of how space traffic coordination was done. The Defense Department was offering a minimal service, but this was never their core priority. And about 20 years ago, the geostationary operators, the operators of geostationary commercial satellites, got so frustrated with the government that they created a separate organization called the Space Data Association so that they could exchange information. So there are some fundamentals that were bubbling up in the industry, a desire to have better knowledge about whatever other people were doing in space, a desire to start building the rule structure for how operators operated in this increasingly congested area. So these initiatives were alive in the commercial sector as well as in the government. I think in the government, there was a debate as to where would this responsibility lie? And I think a lot of people thought, well, perhaps it should go to the FAA since they do air traffic control. Maybe they would also do space traffic control. Some people felt, well, maybe it's the FCC because they do all the coordination on spectrum and also on orbits. But I think it was wisely chosen by the Space Council in the first Trump administration that they gave this responsibility to the Department of Commerce through SPD3.
So then, Richard, building off of that, when you came into the office, I believe in 2022, so a couple of years after, there was again a gap at the director spot. And then when you came into the office, what were your main priorities coming in as OSC director?
Yeah, as Kevin said, prior to his coming back, there'd been a long period where the office sort of went through a decade of the wilderness years where they were kind of not on anyone's top priority list within the Department of Commerce. During that time, the office kind of moved around. Originally, when it was established in the 1980s, it was in the office of the secretary. And so over the years, there had been a question of where should it put it, and it had lived in various organizations and finally ended up within NOAA. I will say I don't think that was ever a great fit for the Office of Space Commerce, and recent legislation on the Hill and a recent executive order from the current Trump administration have suggested that perhaps we need to move the office out of NOAA someplace else, perhaps back into the office of the secretary. And I think that is really important because although NOAA does many incredibly important things for the nation, the role that OSC plays and its responsibilities to the commercial sector and its responsibilities as a regulator really don't align very well with the core responsibilities of NOAA as a weather and climate agency.
So when bringing back to when you were director, knowing how busy that job is for both of you, where did you try to kind of prioritize? What thrusts of either policy or implementation were you trying to prioritize?
Well, thanks to Kevin and his leadership before. I mean, the office has always struggled, and they're struggling again, and perhaps we can get into that later with budgets and at what level the office should be funded. When Kevin was director, he had a bare minimum budget, and through the hard work of the office, by the time I got there, there was a significant budget that allowed us to start the TRACS program. So number one priority was build the team and build the TRACS program. When I got to the office, there really were only a couple of people who were working full-time on the TRACS program. And obviously that needed to change rapidly. So my highest priority had to be, believe it or not, my highest priority had to be HR. I mean, we had to hire the competent people that could put the program together. So that was priority number one. Again, thanks to Kevin, there had already been a significant restructuring of the regulations, the regulatory responsibility of the office in a way that I think, and again, maybe we can talk a little bit more about that. I think that the way that regulation is handled in the Office of Space Commerce for the commercial remote sensing industry is actually a paradigm for other space regulators. It creates a system that is basically a presumption of approval unless the government can argue that there's a reason why the commercial sector should not do something. So I think a really good balance, and maybe we can come back to that. And finally, we knew that there was a large international engagement and commercial sector engagement role because things were dramatically changing both internationally and domestically in terms of commercial space. So those are the three priorities. I probably spent 80% of my time on tracks for the first year and a half. So that getting that program off the ground was the very top priority.
Kevin, as Richard pointed out, it was difficult to get to that point without all of the momentum that you kind of built up during your years as OSC director. And Richard alluded, and both of you have alluded to kind of the need to build up the budget, the small budget when you started, Kevin. And what were some of the kind of enablers for you, whether it's within the department itself, with external to the government, that kind of helped you in building up that momentum? And on the other hand, what were some of the kind of challenges that perhaps the audience may not fully understand of kind of getting to that point?
Sure. So first and foremost, Christine, I had two real enablers in that I had a cabinet level secretary that was a wild enthusiast for space. And so within the department, we basically had the support of the entire department when we needed it, in spite of where we were bureaucratically, as Rich has already suggested, down inside NOAA. That was really important. And of course, I had already worked for over a decade with Scott Pace, who was the executive secretary of the National Space Council. And so those became two real important enablers. Obviously, the impediments internally were just needing to get the office back up and running with very little money. We did it partly by borrowing people, detailees from other parts of the department. We had some detailees from outside the department as well. And so the HR piece, as Rich has already suggested, is always very important, the people that you have. The other enabler, I would say, is that one of the things about the Office of Space Commerce that people don't realize, it's a strange character because it is an advocate for industry inside the government. And that is not always easy to understand. A lot of international partners always ask me, how does that actually work? And it ranges from making sure that when the government did an acquisition, that there wasn't a commercial alternative and sort of pushing on that point, to helping understand the real impact of regulations on both individual and say industry segments. And so really talking to industry directly. We held 3 summits in my early days at Commerce that literally packed the auditorium at Commerce to hear what the different challenges were of the early stage space industry, to talk about risk in space, which was really partly the discussion about SSA and its importance. And so really pulling on industry and making sure we understood exactly what their pressure points were as we were trying to help encourage the growth of the space economy. That's a real strong enabler. And I know Rich followed up on that as well.
Great, thank you. Building on that, so you talked about the balance between fostering industry and also what people externally may not appreciate in terms of being within government. And given the new mission set with Space Policy Directive 3, there's also a balance of, and the increasing number of both commercial space actors and national space actors. What were kind of the biggest challenges, and this question is for both of you, in kind of balancing the space safety needs when it comes to space traffic coordination, even regulatory issues, with also promoting the U.S. commercial space industry? And do you think that's been changing over time?
There's always been this concern that an advocate and a regulator cannot live in the same house. And I actually disagree with that. Now, of course, when I was at Commerce, we had not yet absorbed CRISRA. That actually came on Rich's watch. We had not absorbed the Commercial Remote Sensing Regulatory Affairs Office. They were still an independent entity within NOAA. And so I didn't have that explicitly as a problem. But I think there are actually advantages if you firewall them properly to being both an advocate and a regulator. One of the most important functions is that you start to see what is actually coming in the market. And I think that's one of the roles for OSC I'd like to see a lot more work on. It's very similar to what the Defense Innovation Unit does in the Pentagon. Who's coming in the market? What are they bringing? And very importantly, what kind of funding do they have for the ideas that they're bringing forward? And so I don't know that it's a balance per se, but I think you can do both of those functions very effectively.
I agree with Kevin. We, in the implementation, when I was running the office, we did have a firewall between the regulatory group and the policy group, such that policy couldn't dictate regulatory outcomes. And I think that's fine, and I think that's completely workable. But I think as an organization, it greatly benefits OSC to be actively pursuing knowledge about what's changing in the marketplace, what is new and fresh, what companies. So we spend a lot of our time just talking to young companies. I wish we had had more time for that, because that was probably one of the more enjoyable parts of the job. So I do think it is an issue, of course, because people are concerned, closeness, your proximity to industry influence your judgments in a way that would potentially create unsafe results. But I think with as Kevin pointed out, properly firewall, this is workable.
So shifting gears a little bit. Oh, go ahead. Did you?
I'd like to go back a half a step. In terms of challenges, we talked about HR. And there's also a challenge in the government spending, particularly when you have dramatically changing budgets. So from Kevin's administration to mine, we saw a dramatic increase going up to over 80 million for the budget for the office, with the goal of funding the TRACS program. One of the great challenges in the government is that it's really hard to spend money quickly when you aren't prepared to do that. This isn't just a Commerce Department thing. This will be a major issue for example, any big program, say, for example, Golden Dome, that they're now trying to roll out. When you go from zero to a big budget, you don't have the infrastructure in place. There are tons of government rules which which control how you spend money. Obviously, these are important because you're trying to protect the interests of the taxpayer. But for going from zero to a large budget is extraordinarily difficult, and it takes a lot of time. And so people are always frustrated on the outside, and they say, well, you have money, why didn't you do anything? Well, getting ready to spend money is difficult. And I'd appreciate Kevin's thoughts on that. But I know this administration is also working on that issue now and trying to look for accelerated ways to try to do that.
Yeah, I think when you have a huge budget swing, you're right. One of the things we knew would be an issue in moving the office from NOAA back to the Office of the Secretary is you needed the right infrastructure around you to do the things that an office of that type would have to do. Our deputy secretary at the time used to joke and say to me, bring your CIOs to the meeting when she talked to the different bureaus in the department. And she'd say, oh, Kevin, I realize you don't have a CIO. Why don't you just come along kind of thing. And so, you do need an infrastructure for an office that gets that much money and that much responsibility. And it doesn't happen overnight in the federal government.
Would you say what you're describing are issues more related to organization within government, or are there any nuances that are specific to kind of the space commerce role in particular, or we're dealing with aerospace issues in particular?
I think this is common to the federal government. I don't think anybody else that has that kind of an opportunity, like the shift from my time to Rich's time. When you get that much money, you get more scrutiny, different rules apply to what you're doing. I think that's a federal government-wide issue. Rich, I don't know if you agree with that or not.
I do absolutely agree with it. I think the unique thing about the rapid growth of the commercial space industry is that its relationship to the U.S. government is still very fluid. Lacking the sort of decades of experience, people have fundamental questions like, well, should the government rely on a commercial company that's a young company? What if it goes out of business? Or, are they meeting appropriate safety and security rules that apply to larger defense firms if they're going to offer a product to the U.S. Department of Defense? So a lot of the great innovation came out of companies that are young and thinly staffed. And so how they interact with the government is unique, whether that is NASA or the Defense Department or the intelligence community. Each of these things has to be sorted out on a case-by-case basis. I know, Kevin, you have a lot of experience with the NGA and how they built a relationship. Maybe you could say a couple of words about that.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's just a matter of understanding what's happening in industry, having the long view on this, having worked on satellite imagery issues for many years. In the old days, the government would say exactly as Rich put it, oops, what happens if this company goes out of business? I think that worry is mitigated today because there's a commercial basis on which that can be solved. In other words, the government isn't responsible for the archives and the on-orbit assets. There's typically in this world a commercial aspect that can pick up the resources. Another company. We haven't talked at all yet about the rise of private finance in the space industry, which really kicked in very strongly when I was at Commerce, and I know it has been up and down over the years. But the private finance community is an important buffer in this area because they can also acquire and help put together resources in a way that the government typically would not. So I think it's an easier world. On the other hand, we have doctrine for decades now about leveraging commercial. I just worry that our rhetoric far outpaces the reality of it. And I know good people are working to try to do better, but I think we still need to do more in that regard.
Yeah, I think to follow on that, it's been a complicated puzzle for the government to try to sort out because, on the one hand, other than satellite communications and to a lesser degree commercial remote sensing, a lot of the new initiatives don't have robust commercial markets. In other words, other than the government or governments around the world, there isn't a consumer pull for some products that are compelling or interesting to work on now. And so the question becomes, what is the role of the government in encouraging those developments? I think a good example with NASA is commercial LEO destinations or commercial space stations. It could be a tremendous business, but it almost certainly needs the government to be a large supporter in the beginning. And so I think, and on the Defense Department side, we have large questions about, well, what role should commercial products play in not necessarily information production, but in warfighting? To what extent can the government really rely on a commercial company when the bullets are starting to fly? So there are these really big fundamental issues that we wrestle with all the time in the government. And those discussions, those debates are very, very live today too.
So I know we only have a few minutes left, but I do want to touch a little bit on, and this ties into how do we even define commercial, both within the United States and also internationally as well. I know there's lots of discussions right now around the EU Space Act, and within the Office of Space Commerce has had a significant role. I may be a little bit biased, but with a very small staff in helping both represent the U.S. commercial space industry in different international dialogues, whether they're Track 1.5s or Track 2 types of events and support. What were kind of your priorities when it came to kind of international relations and space policy while you were both directors? And what do you think are kind of the biggest priorities right now, given a really evolving environment?
Well, so when I got to Commerce, I knew that international partnerships would be a very important part of the job. I used to joke and say that my colleagues in the government are all interested in space up there. And I was really mainly interested in space down here. And what I meant by that was finance and regulation and competitiveness of the US industry, anti-competitive behavior on the other hands. And so we knew those were all issues. We had very robust conversations, again, as Rich did with our international partners about market access issues and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think those remain top priority issues today. I'd written a piece not long ago on the EU Space Act, and I worry that if we don't continue to have market access in Europe, that there'll be retaliatory measures that will take place in the market. And I can't imagine a worse scenario than allies arguing or fighting one another about market access issues in a time when we really have to be working together to confront the possibility of conflict in the next few years, the conflict that's underway already. Those are things we have to work through very, very quickly.
I would agree completely with what Kevin said. Two top issues were market access and regulation when we were in discussions internationally. I will add one more: export control. That typically came in the form of people complaining about the U.S. restrictions on export control. So on all those, as Kevin said, the U.S. is a large market, so we've made it actually pretty easy for foreign companies to come here, incorporate in the U.S. and do business as U.S. companies. It's much harder to do the reciprocal in some instances. It's much harder for a U.S. company to go abroad and sell products. So I think the office played a big role in highlighting those issues in order to increase access for U.S. companies globally. Export control, there have been successive rounds of export liberalizations. The way that the rules were created and operated 15, 20 years ago really don't make sense for today's high-paced international technology environment. And so there have been and continue to be significant changes to U.S. export control laws, which greatly assist the U.S. private sector. Our office was very much involved in that. And regulations, as Kevin pointed out, whenever anybody sort of steps up and goes farther than everybody else, like the EU Space Act, it raises questions about reciprocity and whether that'll have a disproportionate impact on the businesses in one country or the other. So the office has been deeply engaged over the years in all of those issues, and I think has played a really important role as the coherent voice for industry in that process.
You were both just at the AMOS conference focusing on space situational awareness, and I'm aware there were several dialogues regarding international relations when it comes to space traffic coordination. How did you take on that issue when you were at OSC?
So I think we had an exceptional AMOS, like many of the prominent space conferences attended at higher levels than ever before. I think the point I would make post AMOS this year is that there's clearly a tremendous amount of complexity on the defense side with space domain awareness. We just want to remind everyone that the initial premise of SPD3, the idea of getting the Department of Defense out of the space safety mission and providing it, having it done by Department of Commerce in that case, is still a very compelling case to be made for lots of reasons. I would also remind people that when we actually do effective space safety, it actually benefits everybody. It's not just benefiting the civil and commercial communities, it's also benefiting the military so that they can do what they're going to do as well. And so we have to continue a multi-pronged effort, an international one, a technical one, an operational one that is underway to make sure we are executing on the civil space safety mission as defined in SPD3.
I'll say I agree, Amos. Another exciting conference this year. A lot of new technologies being discussed. People now starting to look at what is the role of AI and machine learning in SSA. What is the role in the autonomous operation of satellites? So there's a whole new set of technologies that are coming online. They're going to really be transformative. And I think there were a lot of great discussion and papers on that. At the same time, there was some concern in the conference. As I think everyone probably knows, there's been a robust debate between OMB, the Department of Commerce, and the White House about whether and at what level they're going to continue to fund the TRACS program. The TRACS program reported out. It's doing well. They're on schedule to go live in January. And I think there was a fair amount of anxiety, particularly among SSA companies, as what would happen and how we would deal with the disruption if the TRACS program were to disappear. So today, for its beta users, which cover over 8,000 satellites, so a large percentage of the operational satellites currently on orbit, TRACS is already offering services that exceed what was available from the Defense Department. I think there was great enthusiasm for this program, and I hope that the administration commits to continuing funding for the program in the future.
Yeah, and I just make one more quick point. Rich rightly focused on the new technologies and how they're emerging in this space. It's very rapid. You know, part of this story about commercial space writ large is about speed. And there are many new technologies that are being brought to bear on this problem specifically. I hope we can take maximum advantage of those, not only by looking at what the government needs to do or feels it needs to do, but also by looking at the direction that industry is going, including where its investors are encouraging them to head and how it can help contribute to the SPD3 mission.
And we're running short on time, so I'll close with, is there anything you would have done differently while you were director at OSC, or anything else you'd like to leave our audience with?
Again, I just think I would have liked to have had more resources and time to look forward in the market, to understand what kinds of capabilities were coming in. We had robust conversations with industry, but I think there needs to be a more formalized process by which you understand what kind of capabilities are coming in the market and how much financing there is behind them. You know, the government plays a good role in planting seeds. Companies then go to Wall Street and say, hey, Uncle Sam likes what I've done. What do you think about it as a business idea? I think there's a nice synergy there. I'd like to go deeper into the market to understand what's coming. One of the things we didn't talk about were the disincentives in government to cancel or stop programs for which something is moving so quickly in the market. And that's a very hard call, analytically, obviously, but things are moving so fast that government program managers are reluctant to say, gee, I'm going to stop what I'm doing for lots of good reasons, because there's somebody bringing something to the market that I can actually replace at a lower cost point, more efficient, you know, more rapidly innovating in the past. The incentive structures are in the wrong place on that. So like to have done more on that area, on that issue specifically.
I guess for me, the thing I would have done differently, so much about getting work done in the government is understanding the processes that allow you to hire and spend money and collaborate across boundaries, exchanging funds with your sister agencies, both NASA and the Department of Defense. I probably would have spent more time up front, better understanding all those tools, because at the end of the day, that's what really motivates and speeds a project, is the ability to reach out and get that one important person who needs to move something along or move a process along, or understanding how an alliance with DoD on joint data buys could accelerate both projects. There's some things that it's just hard to know when you step into the office, because it's such a broad range of tools and technologies that you need to understand to work the government system. So I think I would have spent more time upfront trying to get a basic understanding of how that function, how the acquisition system functions, and probably hire appropriately to do that early on to get greater momentum in the system.
Well, thank you both very much. We covered a lot of different topics and could probably, there's several I would love to honestly spend hours more on, like how do we even define commercial space, where the risk and financing issues lie, to more about space traffic coordination and kind of future what's happening internationally. But we really appreciate getting both of your time as both former OSC directors and also with your vast experience across both government and industry.
Thanks, Christine. It's great to be here.
Thank you, Christine. I'm sure Kevin and I will come back if you ask us.
Yes, surely there are some varying thoughts on just what commercial space is. And OSC has to take that long view of space commerce in order to protect the viability of the sector, both in terms of innovation and maintaining a safe operating environment for future business. We hope that you enjoyed the Going Faster series. Remember, there are 159 other space policy shows that you can watch. And some other 6-part series include a deep dive on U.S. national space policy, ISAM, or In-Space Servicing Assembly and Manufacturing, kind of peeking into the future of a lunar economy, or cislunar economy as well, and international space safety, resilience, and even contested space. So you can follow us on the socials. You can subscribe for notifications at csps.aerospace.org. And there you can find also the Center's deeper research on topics from across the enterprise from our expert policy analysts. Stay tuned for future shows, and thank you to our audience again for supporting us these past 5 years, one of the longest running space policy podcasts. The Aerospace Corporation is proud to be unbiased and not-for-profit. And thank you to James Liggins, our technical director. It's been a pleasure working with you, and happy trails in your retirement chapter, my friend. To our audience, thank you for watching or listening. Until next time.